The MCU's done a great job of juggling its source material while also making movies that you can enjoy without having an encyclopedic knowledge of comics, but even then there's still a lot of missed opportunities that I just can't let go, so here's the ones that suck the most. When it comes to things that were obviously mistimed and just generally felt like an afterthought, nothing really comes close to Black Widow, like the entire movie. From being the most skippable movie in the MCU when the MCU has the Incredible Hulk in it, to happening after we already saw her go splat, which took any consequences, and just threw them in the dumpster fire. The movie's not the worst thing ever, it's just completely unnecessary and felt more like an introduction to Florence Pugh's Yelena, whom I love, rather than a send-off for Black Widow, or even just an interesting different look at her character. We don't even really get to see much of her life as a Black Widow pre-Avengers. We kept hearing that she was a killer and a much different person, but was she really? And especially with the whole mind control thing that the villain, whose name isn't even important enough to mention, used to control her, really just absolves her of most, if not all, of the supposedly terrible things that she had to do. The MCU already knew how to incorporate spy themes into the formula, but here it felt more like a rushed Disney Plus show that got the movie treatment only because of contractual obligations. Then there's the whole Taskmaster situation, which definitely wasn't what I wanted, but in the continuity now, there's been a 5+ year buffer, so maybe she's developed that snarky personality and we can see some more of that mere match combat. Now, when it comes to groups and teams that we could have seen on the screen, we could be here all day talking about niche groups that no one cares about. Looking at you, Inhumans. But when it comes to the best meeting of the minds, you really can't go wrong with the Illuminati. Now, even when everyone was still alive and not elderly, we still only had 2 of the 6 members in the MCU, those being Tony and Doctor Strange. Maybe Black Bolt counts, but I never watched the Inhuman show to know, and I assume neither did you. Even if you did include him though, we'd still be missing Namor, Professor X, and Mr. Fantastic. Black Panther, Cap, and Hulk have all been a part of the group, with Hulk joining as Doc Green, he's like a version of Professor Hulk, and once as Amadeus Cho, the newest Green Machine, so we really could have had a similar team if you swapped them in. And because of course Black Bolt isn't actually in it because nobody cares about the Inhumans, we could have had Hank Pym as the other member. Now, I feel like I shouldn't have to explain why seeing all these guys in one room would be one of the coolest things happening in this universe, but considering this was another instance of Tony overstepping and trying to do too much, having this happen after he endangered the world with Ultron, it kinda makes sense that this didn't happen. Still, having a rep from every major superhero group would have been amazing to see, but now without Tony, this really just wouldn't hit the same. Okay, now buckle up because this next section is honestly going to be pretty long, because for a character that was once one of Marvel's heaviest hitters, pun kinda intended, Hulk hasn't been treated too kindly in the MCU. He's only gotten one movie, and both Marvel and MCU fans tend to disregard that one. He hasn't really been that important in the grand scheme of things, and honestly it just kinda sucks for him. Sure, he did the snap, but Thor could have done that, and when it came to doing all that quantum testing, Tony could have done that too, especially since we don't even see Bruce do too much aside from hitting a few buttons. When you look at the MCU, Hulk definitely has some cool moments, but there's nothing that helps him stand out, especially when he's not even the strongest Avenger anymore. Some people wanted a Thanos-Hulk rematch, but since Professor Hulk is generally always weaker than his savage counterpart, that fight would have been even shorter and more embarrassing for him, so it's pretty much a good thing that didn't happen. And part of the reason why his character just hasn't been able to get a solo movie or the respect he deserves is because Marvel still doesn't have the rights to do a solo movie. Sure, they can put him in whatever they want to, as long as it's not just a Hulk project. And that's probably why he hasn't gotten the love that other, much less popular at the time, heroes have gotten. At least we'll have his appearance in She-Hulk, and maybe he'll do something positive aside from being the only reason she even exists. Okay, I know I just talked about him, but this is so specific and downright upsetting that it just had to be its own entry. What was up with Bruce and Natasha's relationship? Even back in the OG Avengers, there was a little extra spice between them, and we kept getting something teased, but all my guy Bruce got was a kiss and push, which, considering Natasha's fate, would have been a perfect thematic parallel to how Hulk and Nat go to Vormir, but no, that would have been too much of a nice bookend and would have been much better than Bruce throwing a park bench after finding out that someone he loved was now just gone forever. Listen, Hulk's not even in my top 5 Marvel characters, but seeing him being relegated to essentially being a bench warmer during the culmination of 10 plus years of buildup is just really unfortunate. Maybe he'll take a bigger leadership role for the new crop of Earth's mightiest heroes, but again, we'll just have to wait and see. The other relationship with promise that never went anywhere was between Cap and Spider-Man. Since the MCU set up Tony as the sort of adult in the room for Peter, it does kinda make sense that they didn't want to go too far with making Peter the kid that everyone had to babysit, but aside from their little interaction in Civil War, we never get to see them talk again. In the comics, the two of them become pretty good friends during the Civil War arc after Peter turncoats, so it kinda makes sense for them to at least have some type of relationship, but nope, not here. Peter being the youngest hero helping to keep Cap up with the times could have been a movie on its own, but I know that's just wishful thinking. It just makes too much sense to have these two characters with extremely strong morals pal around, and considering that Tony really didn't leave Peter with too much in terms of lessons, except maybe don't be a know-it-all, I'm sure that Cap could have given him something a little bit more substantial. We already know that Tom Holland is down for an Anthony Mackie Cap team up, so maybe we'll get that dynamic. It wouldn't be the same, but more Mackie is always good in my eyes. Remember in Infinity War when Cap, Falcon, and Widow save Wanda and Vision, and it's looking like Cap has been leading a sort of secret Avengers team because of the whole Sokovia fallout? And then remember when none of that was important and everyone just moved on from that? We'll get more into the Sokovia Accords being little more than a please don't do any avenging without telling us in a bit, but the fact that the secret Avengers is used only to be thrown away after one fight is just super upsetting to me. Obviously, they couldn't make a Secret Avengers movie work with what the overall plan of the MCU was at the time, but not looking into how Cap's team had to still do all that cool avenging while also staying under the radar would have been dope, but instead it turned into a Ronin Hawkeye situation that was cool for about 10 seconds, or just as long as they were on screen. Okay, now on to the Sokovia Accords. So they can't still be a thing, right? The first problem is that this seems more like a plot hole situation, because how can Cap be leading a support group in Endgame and just be all out in the open when, per the Accords, he should be a fugitive of the United Nations, and I don't buy them just giving him community service and saying, alright, you've paid your debt to society now. Now, when looking to the actual missed opportunity part of it, we don't see any real ramifications of them. The movies make it seem like it's primarily directed towards the Avengers, but since it's just a reskin of the Superhuman Registration Act, it should be a prevalent issue for all of our heroes. The only character that really had any issues after the fact was Ant-Man being on house arrest, and even that didn't stop him from doing anything. I think having a scene where a hero literally cannot do anything because of the Accords could have been great, and it could have helped Tony realize that that wasn't one of his best ideas. Imagine Thanos gets all the Infinity Stones on Earth because they couldn't mobilize fast enough, and then Tony's sacrifice ties into him righting one of his many, many wrongs. Now, with most of those who ended up fighting because of the Accords are gone, I doubt we'll even be seeing too much of them going forward. Another group that had to deal with the legislation on registration are, of course, the X-Men and their mutant pals, but again, because of initial licensing issues, they couldn't have been included. But now, with Disney's Fox acquisition, we are so close to having an X-Men vs. Avengers arc. Or at least we were before most of the people who were core Avengers hung up their capes one way or another. What's crazy about this missed opportunity is they had two very easy and very in-universe ways to bring them in since the acquisition. The first way could have been through the resnap, where people who came back had different genetic makeup or something, or the second, which is my personal favorite, the Celestials did it, which is what happened in the comics. With the Eternals being introduced in The Eternals, it would have been so easy to say that there are those who possess a gene that grants them powers, but there hasn't been a moment that activated until whatever it happens in Eternals. I haven't seen it yet. At this point, the only way I can even really see the X-Men pop up in the MCU would be through some multiverse or quantum shenanigans, but even with those two options, I'm not gonna hold my breath on those. Now, for the last missed opportunity, we still have a lot to choose from. Tony not fighting the actual Mandarin, Tony never getting to play around with Wakanda tech, the Inhumans in general. But the last thing I want to talk about isn't really specific to one thing, and more has to do with how things are marketed. I know, riveting stuff. But it is a very major problem in my eyes. What I mean specifically is that with the amount of trailers and junkets that come out with these movies, things that would have been better shown off for the first time in theaters, since they are just so hard up on putting things in theaters, are instead just completely revealed. The best recent example comes from No Way Home's marketing. Spoilers, just in case. So for a movie that did what it did, it still decided to show off a lot of things that I think should have been hidden. Imagine a world where instead of already knowing that Doc Ock, Electro, and Green Goblin were in the movie, imagine if the entire marketing just made it seem like the conflict between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange was actually the main focus, and then you sit down and have your mind blown that they got all the old school villains and Spideys and Daredevil. There's actually a pretty cool video about trailers and why they suck too, but I don't think I'm legally allowed to say that here. Anyway, TLDR, studios, specifically Marvel, need to stop giving up information that would turn a great movie experience into an amazing one. When it comes to missed opportunities, it's always looking toward what could have been, like we already could have had a Doctor Doom solo movie in a perfect world, but unfortunately, I don't live there. Yet.